why are we helping the autonomy and the rights of whoever gives the service? And thirdly, why are we creating more progressive alternatives for the population that actually need it the most? Firstly, what are we talking about? Firstly, we want just to get out of this debate any talk that there may be about specific, precedents of the US Supreme Court. This is the Supreme Court's decision, which is one of many conservative decisions. We think this is not in this debate. We don't think this is the issue here. Secondly, what are the issues we are talking about? We are talking about whether a person that do tattoos can refuse to do a tattoo with a woman in bikini. We are talking about whether we have a cake, like a marriage, a wedding cake, which has two gay people on it. Those are the things we are talking about. Notice that those are places where the images of the people where you don't agree with are very on display. Everyone can see that. And so we think this is the relevant case. The cases of like just not giving services to gay people is not in the debate. Clarification?
Clarification. Just to be clear, this is only relevant in cases where this would be discrimination. So say a woman in bikini, not a protected class, not discrimination.
We think everything that is discrimination against race, against gender, or against sexual orientation, and everything that is under the discrimination law. So women in bikini, this is misogyny, obviously in the debate. Okay, let's talk about rights and autonomy of whoever gives the service. So firstly, we think that this doesn't happen unless it is in very places where the provider of the service is really helped by that. Why? Because the interest of the provider of the service is to give it the service. He wants money, he wants reputation, he wants repeating customers that will actually buy from him and help him. And so we think the places where he doesn't do that is where there is a high risk for him, where there is something that he can actually lose. What do we think are we talking about? Firstly, when it harms very much his religious identity, meaning that for me as a person that does wedding cakes, if I put two gay people on the wedding cake, this is like promoting their marriage, which I don't agree with. This is like telling them, okay, you can actually go on and get married. But secondly, we think this is right in your face, meaning that if I see them, I am afraid. I don't want anyone to think that I'm promoting that, showing that as something that is legitimate and normalizing that. For me as a religious person, seeing those people and thinking that I'm the one that benefited materially from promoting those ideas, this is like going against everything I believe in. It's like being promoting things that can potentially get me into hell and get my family into hell, because this is something that is very much against my belief as a religious person. We think the same thing as showing people, women in bikini, right? This is the noise ignore. Showing women in bikini. If I'm a religious or ultra-Orthodox Jewish person, I can simply not do that. This is something that harms me and harms the modesty which I believe in. That is right. Okay, great. Secondly, we think it harms my identity and my community identity. If I am seen as one that cooperates with people that want me to show those symbols, show those things, it is more likely that I will see overall as someone progressive and not as obedient to the conservative rules of my community, which I should follow. This means that I'm seen as not religious enough by my community members. This means that people will not want to be associated with me that much, that my children will maybe get a worse shield, that everyone around me will see me as less religious. This means that it doesn't just harm me, but harms everyone around me. Even if this doesn't harm me, it is enough for me to believe that this is true, because the harm I face for myself, the psychological tension and pressure that I face is already enough to want me not to do that. Why is this so important for me? Firstly, we think that people don't really have a choice, right? They have to work. Many of the time those are like low-paying jobs when when you are forced to do that, this is your profession, being a baker, and so we don't think you chose to be in this situation. But secondly, we think that it is just your work. The fact that you are feeling unsafe in your workplace because you don't know if people will actually ask you to do those things, because you feel like you betray who you believe in, but you have to do that because this is the law and things like that. It means that you are just feeling constantly threatened. But in the comparative, why doesn't it harm so much to people that are discriminated against? Firstly, we think they have alternatives. They have other people that can give them those services. Secondly, this is many of the time extremely short-term services, for example, cakes and things like that.
willingly go to someone they know hates them and wants to give them your money?
We think, especially if those things that you are talking about are provocations and places where you want to do that intentionally to make the other people angry, this is all so much worse because we think that what you get from that is not so much what the other person is feeling attacked, and this is very, very bad. Okay, let's talk about why we create more progressive alternatives. So firstly, we think that today people that are actually wanting those services but need to compromise or something like that is experiencing a market failure. Why is this the case? They would want to go, and get gay-friendly services and to get their wedding cake and things like that, because everyone compromising so much and going to people that are not gay-friendly and getting their cake from places that are not gay-friendly. Overall, there is not enough market, or there is less market for people that actually promote gay-friendly products and things like that. What are we doing? We are breaking this deadlock. We are saying in the get-go, you cannot get, those stores are not getting the wedding cakes for gay people, and so we are creating a bigger market share of people that actually want those products, and so we are making the overall percentage of services that are for gay people expressively much bigger. But secondly, even if we are making the number of opportunities of gay people much bigger, why? Because today, if I am a religious baker, I don't know if I give service to gay people if I can actually control him not asking me to put 2 men on a cake. This means that from the get-go, when I see a person and I think of him as gay and I don't want him to intervene with my orders, I wouldn't want to get him from the first place. I will make excuses for not getting him even if he doesn't want the 2 men on the cake. This means that the gay people are getting discriminated because the service providers cannot state their preferences from the first place. So we are actually allowing more options for more gay people, and we're giving us the legitimate choice we call it to propose.
We're going to analyze why people deserve access to goods and services and why they will lose this access, why we really hurt the way minorities feel in the short term and small scale and in the long term and large scale. If I get to it, I'll talk about the extreme judicial activism, if not Menachem will. Let's start with a bit of framing. What falls under expressive? In law, we care about the specific wording of the decision. The court referred to it as coerced speech. I am forced to display a message as a form of expression. It means any time I display a message for someone else, be it writing happy birthday on a cake, building them a website, designing a wedding invitation, all of that I'm now allowed to be fully discriminatory. Who gets denied as a result? First, minorities, gay people, trans people, members of other religions or other ethnicities, even the other political party. I can refuse to print a balloon that says Happy Quinceañera. I can refuse to sing at a bar mitzvah. I can refuse to build a neon sign for a Chinese restaurant, because all of these things are expressive. But even large groups. If I believe women shouldn't run businesses, I won't offer any expressive services to a woman business order. If I believe Democrats are a threat to our state, I'll refuse working with them. For instance, printing flyers for either of these groups. Let's get into my first argument, why people deserve access to goods and services, and in some people they'll lose it, in some areas they'll lose it. So why will they lose it? First, some areas are broadly homophobic or racist. If you're in a deep red state where no one is openly gay, and everyone has intuitions against it, then everyone is going to be homophobic. If you're in a Rust Belt state, they'll hate immigrants. A Mormon state could neglect anyone that isn't Mormon. Tons of states could be anti-black. People in those areas, note, cannot actually move to other areas. If they can't access it there, they can't access it out elsewhere. Don't let governments lie to you that you can pick up and move states. Moving states is first very hard. You lose your home, you lose your family, you lose your job, you lose your connections, you lose all of your sunk costs, you lose your local culture and identity. But secondly, it's very expensive. Most people don't own houses, and even if they do, they lose a lot of money selling the house. Most people can't move to, if they're in a red state, a blue state will be more expensive to move to. But most people are renters. They're unable to put down the down payment on a new house. They're unable to even transfer all their stuff to a new place. It's unaffordable to most people, especially blacks, Latinos, LGBT and the mentally ill, who have far less financial reserves and far less connections. It means that for them, waiting a few months in this new city until they make friends in a job is simply impossible. They could say you can just cross state lines, but that already adds an insane cost of money, fuel, time, and oftentimes isn't enough because your neighboring state is just as racist as yours. And this has to be done every time you want to access these goods and services as a gay person. Why do people deserve access? Later. First, we believe people shouldn't be discriminated against for things they can't control. They shouldn't see others getting what they don't and they need merely because of the color of their skin, or the content of their love, or the God they pray for. But we also believe that people specifically deserve an equal playing field in the economy. We don't get to tax people differently depending on their ethnicity. Why is this? Especially in a capitalistic country, without much of a social support network, where the exclusive way to rise from poverty is by advancing your own career or business. This ruins it because some people don't have equal access to goods nor to services and either have less of these or have to pay far more for them. Let's take a PR from closing.
So even if I agree with you and you have a right to services, why does it give you the right to coerce someone else to give you those services?
So Menachem is going to engage on why this isn't a significant harm to those people and why if it is, you're not making a significant delta in it. But I also think that the status quo in every country is what I said. In no country is what you said prioritized over what I said. Your intuition should be with me here. Let's talk about how this makes minorities feel really, really bad. Specifically in America, we have a permanent reminder now of the oppressive laws of the past, of the Jim Crow laws, feeling that all of our progress of millions of social activists matters and winning the majority vote in year after year, both in number of votes for parliament and in number of votes for president, doesn't matter because of 3 appointees of President Trump who decided they don't give a shit about anything that came before them. It makes you feel weak, neglected, unseen for, uncared for, a second-class citizen. You're reminded that you live in a country where you don't deserve access because people hate you without even knowing you. That wishing you a happy birthday on a cake is such a huge harm for them, as Yuval just said in a POI, that they'd rather turn the business away and neglect a human being. What are the impacts of this? First, this ruins your special day. On your birthday, on your wedding day, you're reminded of the hate you feel. And any woman here can know that that can absolutely ruin your day or week or your month. So, sorry guys, let's be real. This also ruins your day-to-day. You see signs on so many businesses saying, we don't serve blacks, or we don't serve gays. And you're allowed to do that as long as they offer expressive services. You can't look at me with shock, Rina. Read the motion. This makes you give up on services ahead of time, just out of fear of rejection, especially if you're visibly trans or ethnic in a red state. This makes it even harder for you to live your daily lives. Trans people already plan their day so that they don't have to go to the bathroom out of their home, as in they minimize the amount of hours they spend out of their home. You have to go out of your way now to get to the right businesses or get by without access to services that you need. What is the long-term impact here? First, note this serves to validate, entrench, and strengthen prejudice and oppression. Why is this true? First, we give judicial legitimacy to the racism, as in my racism is now court-sanctioned. But secondly, we allow all the hidden racism to rise up. Currently, if you say these things, you get punished for them, so it's not normalized. Tomorrow it becomes the norm in many places. Kids grow up in areas where that's everything. And we also push minorities away from these areas. And when they stay in these areas, we push them further into the closet or make them stuck at home. So we have far less exposure to them and normalization of them. Why is this important? We have a growing feedback loop to the harms to the minority. As in, any harms that, all of the harms that I just told you, as we stop the normalization of minorities and increase the normalization of racism, more and more of these people will face it in more and more places in life until the Supreme Court decides to pass a new law, this time without the word expressive, any services. Why not? It makes just as much sense. Because this obviously is plain wrong. This isn't actually your expression. If you write happy birthday for me, if you write a flyer that says what I want, that's bullshit. And no one's going to believe that you're actually hurt by it or that it's actually a type of freedom of speech. We all know what it is. All the minorities know what it is. A blatant attempt to bring America back 100 years. So it's opening opposition.
No. If this law doesn't only not help minorities, but rather help them, we win, because we have minorities, which is always metric. So we win. But note again that if this law is illegitimate, we also win, because illegitimate laws are by definition illegitimate, ontologically wrong, violate your rights, and also illegitimate and have to be pulled through. Therefore, opposition has double burden on them, legitimacy and efficacy. We're going to win on both. Starting with engagement on opening opposition on the question of efficacy. Number one, I want to take out this point of minorities feel bad. Note the entire point is you're a minority in an ultra-conservative state, you feel bad. I don't know. You still have all of the ultra-conservative politicians making out a lot of the rhetoric against you all of the time. You have all of the other Supreme Court decisions against the Roe v. Wade, against the discrimination in universities, against all of that. You have all of the other people around you in your community who are probably still conservative and still racist, and even if they're forced to forward through expressive services, you still know that they don't want to and feel outside. I'm not sure what the data of slightly more, we already know that everyone is racist and hate you. That's only not going to win. Second of all, huge mitigation over here. Expressive services are all services, right? It's the fact that happy birthday is an expressive service because it's just for you as a person. Expressive services on non-discrimination, on services specifically on protected classes. As in, it's happy birthday and continue to be gay, happy birthday and continue to be black, or stuff like that. Because these are non-discrimination clauses, right? The Civil Rights Act doesn't say, it says you can deny generally, but specifically the expression that's allowed there is about protected classes, and you will still of course offer services to protected classes, just not the expressive services about their identity. Okay, that's two mitigations already. But note here, the last mitigation here. Note here that all of OO's cases is based around a very, very, very big burden. The burden of you're in an area with literally zero businesses that are willing to help you, zero alternatives. Note here, and this is very important. This area must literally be very, very, very rural or small. Why? Because cities are big, there's a lot of businesses. Even if the area is broadly conservative, there's likely still a couple of liberals who want to offer you something. Note here, and this is very important. If you're in a small rural area where literally the entire population is conservative, then likely this law is non-enforceable, which is the truth about non-discrimination laws in ultra-conservative areas in the United States. Why is that? Because the police is full of people who are against you, and even subtle racists can do that, right? That's in the account of BLM and stuff like that the police are not racist. The court is against you, full of conservative judges who are going to go against it. The fact that your community is against you, oftentimes threatens you, oftentimes you know that they are racist and puts it against you. This is literally the case in the United States, and entire areas called sundown towns, which are called that because of the fact that for a black person to stay after sundown essentially means that they're going to get beat and nobody will do anything about it. This law is only enforceable in areas where broadly liberal people exist and can actually ensure enforceability. The liberal lawyers, liberal judges, liberal police person who can actually ensure that. This is specifically important because if we enter our case here, it's about the fact that the status quo that the Ayal tells you and they never engage with. It's the fact that specifically today, businesses just hide the fact that they're discriminatory. Instead of doing that, I'm still religious, I still don't want to offer the service. So what I do, I try to make the experience as painful as possible for the person to realize that they will go on. I deny it for other reasons. Oh, I don't have money, I don't have the time, I don't have stuff. And you probably win in court. Why? Because of innocence until proven guilty. Because it's a very high burden of proof when you give all of these other excuses, when you have the lawyers against you, when apparently you have conservative judges for you. It's very hard to prove that you've actually been discriminated against. What this law prevents is specifically you doing it out loud. This is what OO themselves concede when they tell you that now businesses are going to declare that truthfully. We think that this is a good thing. Why? Because instead of you just being forced into the shadows and trying to kick off clients and make these things as painful as possible, so they will leave you the fuck alone and you won't want to give them a service because they're still hating your identity and you don't want to be part of that, you can just make it fucking clear. So there are two impacts here. Number one, people can vote with the dollar. They can go into businesses that are better. Both discriminated people and non-discriminated people. There are a lot of progressive people in the United States. They want to offer their businesses into a good business. But hearing about like a business that, oh, maybe told them that you don't have the money isn't as easy as the fact that businesses literally tell you that they're conservative and don't want to have gays for their expressive meaning and you can push them away. We get in the fact that in many areas in the United States, note here, even in conservative states, the cities are usually liberal, right? Therefore, people are more academic, more urban, more minorities. Within Rust Belt states, the cities are all democratic. Austin, Texas is the democratic hub of the South. All of the cities within cities are usually liberal. This is where most of the capital is, so most of the liberal people can control the businesses. And lastly, it's about moving. Note here, again, opening opposition constructs a case which is about moving between state lines. We think this is bullshit, because again, even if the state is conservative, a lot of cities within it, areas within it are liberal. All states are big, even the conservative states have liberal areas within them most of the time. The reason why this is important is because we think that moving is more than passive than talking. You see, getting and moving and getting a job isn't that hard. Millions of people do it. Because you can pay to get a job, right? You can find jobs in the area that suits your skill set. You can arrange to get the job beforehand. You can move. Thing is that, and even if you need to take a little bit of step, that pays off over time. You get a better community. The thing is that today the problem is that we're biased against it, specifically because it looks too hard. You need to do a lot of research. You think that your situation is good enough because of the fact that you can still somewhat get businesses from the other people. We break this bias. Today people are just living good enough. Have to force businesses to get out the services of people that they don't want. Have to not live in that. We break that bias and actually get to move into a liberal area of better community for you, with better people for you. These are three mechanisms that explain A, why they are likely not working in just data. 2, why we get more liberal support for liberal businesses. C, why we're likely to move, and that's a good thing. Before we continue on, let's closing up in the session.
The delta for that discourse is whether you're protected from applicant discrimination or not. Whether you fear the next Supreme Court decision will allow discrimination in all services or allow courts to discriminate in sentences.
Okay, I don't get it. If the majority of Supreme Court judges are conservative and wants to appeal discrimination, then the moment that an anti-discrimination lawsuit will come to the place on just discrimination in general, they will also oppose it, they will not want to pass it. I'm not sure why we need to do it piecemeal like piecemeal, instead of just, if you just don't want discrimination laws to be a thing, you can rule against discrimination laws being a thing. These are the people who canceled Roe versus Wade, one of the most greatest decisions in the United States Supreme Court in terms of disability. I don't think that they're like piecemeal or they're moderate in terms of how they do things. I'm not sure why this specifically is a thing. Lastly, one principle. Note, all of the August principle discriminations, as Yael only fucking describes, are the same on outside symmetry, right? Because also it's your identity, your expressive, everything that you do, you're very religious, you care about it, you want it, and it's part of your core identity. Several points here. Number one, your job is most important to you than an alternative. Your job is literally your life, what you do. And whenever you do something wrong in your job, it is tainted for the majority of stuff that you do. Comparatively speaking, you can do expressions in other ways, right? You don't need the business person to say, I'm gay, I'm happy. You don't put it on a cake, but you center your entire wedding on a speech on how good it's being gay, right? On the simple fact that you can always find alternative forms with the same amount of expression. We aren't sure why you specifically need this one business person to give you the expression that you want comparatively to them who are forced to do their job, which is a major thing in their life. Second, it's the fact that specifically coercive speech is the worst thing ever in a democratic society. Panel, freedom of speech is core to your ability to change the state. It's core to the social contract. It's core to your ability to influence the most powerful body within a democratic state. We think that that's why freedom of speech is uniquely protected. Why the first amendment was written on freedom of speech. Why the fact that it's the most important right, it's usually protected in the United States Supreme Court, according to most of all, because it's core to your ability to function in a democratic society. Very important.
As much as I love religion debates, this is clearly not one. And while OG insists on debating that motion from the novice competition 2 years ago, specifically about religious rights, we think there are a very small minority who aren't even really protected under this motion anyway. So let's explain why this motion doesn't help religious people to the extent they claim, and let's deal with essentially everything else. I might have one extra point in this speech on freedom of expression for minorities, but mostly rebuttal is enough to deal with everything they have, and engagement will win us the top half quite clearly. So, let's start with this issue on religion. They tell us, oh, you're going to be seen as a supporter of this cause. A, we think, no, people can separate. They can understand that you're doing it for someone else. But B, and more importantly, you can still be coerced into catering that same gay wedding. This law does not protect religious people in the areas where religious people care. No. The law, the Supreme Court decision, which yes, I actually read the entirety of because I'm a nerd like that, actually protects this under free speech, but not under freedom of religion. Why is that? Because only coerced speech, where I'm saying something in favor of someone else's problem, what does that mean? It means that religions that generally care about the content, not the optics. That is to say, religions care about the fact that I can't support, I can't be party to this type of behavior, have no outlet. They are still forced to do the same thing. Not only that, we actually think there's a degree of mutual exclusivity. We think the court, in this decision, made it clear that this comes because of freedom of expression. Meaning, it is much less likely now that a lawsuit specifically for freedom of religion can work or will be accepted, both because there's less reason to sue now that some cases are already covered, so the expressive people, who are those who are more likely to have higher paying jobs and sue the court to begin with, are less likely to come, but also just because the Supreme Court made it pretty clear in this decision that they don't believe freedom of religion is a reason to deny services, only coerced speech, i.e. freedom of speech. Therefore, we actually think this harms religious people. But for all the other cases in this debate, we simply think it doesn't work at all. So, let's talk about everything else they give us. They try to tell us that actually somehow we're going to create more stores specifically for gay people or for specific minorities. Look, no one is doing that in Texas. But it's not just that no one's doing it anyway. Here's the comparison. There are plenty of fairly moderate people who are happy to service everyone so long as it's not a big deal. The moment they would have to be branded the store that services gay people, the moment that their community, their church, their family see them as the guy who makes cakes for illegal immigrants, they are going to be unwilling to do so. Meaning, the point at which you need to stand out to be specifically that store, which OG analyzes is the likely case, is when even people who would have been okay with providing services no longer are. And as far as this whole claim that now stores don't discriminate at the start because they can just discriminate at a later point. It is equally illegal to discriminate at the start, and that point is symmetric because obviously at the point at which you're afraid it will violate your values, you can just try to cop out. If it works, to claim it's for other reasons. It works at the beginning, it works in the middle. There is no delta there. Now, let's get into the guys. He tries to put on us this double burden, but look, it simply doesn't work logically. Let's think about this. His claim is, oh, if it's illegitimate, we win. That's a two-way street. If this discrimination is illegitimate, then we win regardless of the outcomes because we need to prevent this kind of discrimination. So we also only have to win one clash here. And what they try to do on this is they try to say, look, we're not harming rights that much because expressive services aren't that much. But, yeah, you know what? So let's get into that. Expressive services and why they matter, and this is also a point on freedom of expression and freedom of speech for minorities in 1 second. So, here's the issue. Freedom of speech means the ability to say something in a platform where it can be heard. We live in a world where freedom of speech is outsourced. That is to say, I don't know how to make a massive banner or a website to promote my ideals. My only way to express my freedom of speech, my only vehicle, is through businesses. At the point at which businesses do not have to express that for me, essentially I have lost my freedom of speech because my freedom of speech is dependent on other people choosing that they want to express the same thing. This is because the court was simply wrong. The court tells us, oh, it's coerced speech because the website designer or the cake designer is the one speaking. Everyone here recognizes the falsehood of this. The person expressing things is the person who paid for it to be expressed, the person who chose the message, and now the court is limiting quite significantly the free speech of those people. And note, they are specifically minorities, and not just minorities, but the minorities we like to talk about in debate, because specifically the people discriminated against most are those who will have the fewest options of places to express their views. Meaning, views which are the most minority, the most pressed against in society, that face the most backlash, are the ones that can't even be heard in the first place. Closing, yes?
So if I'm poor, am I allowed to steal your house because it benefits me?
Okay, so you want to talk legitimacy? Look, again, like I said, legitimacy is a two-way street. We also think that if this is a question of religious protection, then obviously we think the court made the wrong decision in not making this a religious protection clause. If it's a question, if you actually want to run free speech, which is the only thing you can claim is the right that's being protected by the court, because it's the only right that the court claimed to protect in this, and it expressly says religious rights do not work, then what you would have to say is you would actually have to make the claim that this speech is so terrible. Once I've told you not only why it's not, but also Ayal told you why it harms the customers to a great degree and why we don't allow that in the public sphere, but B, I've actually explained to you why we are limiting the speech much more severely of the people who want to express their opinions and now cannot. We think for all of those reasons it's quite obvious that the rights issue falls to our side. Now, let's finish this off with a little bit of weighing. No, before that, one last thing. Note on this whole, oh, well, they're just claiming slippery slope, the court won't do any more things. We do not need to prove that there's an actual slippery slope and the court is likely to make other decisions of this ilk. All we need to show is the harm to people in their fear that that will happen. And yes, minorities who read about Roe v. Wade being overturned after they said it's never going to happen, and then who read about this case, and who have read about the Supreme Court systematically cutting away at their rights, who read left-wing news and believe that the Supreme Court is evil and is coming for their children, and maybe they're right. Whether or not the Supreme Court would actually go that far, it doesn't matter. The harm to them on a daily basis, scared to leave the house, their feelings of inadequacy, their feeling like they don't live in a democracy, and their voices aren't heard, as in fact they aren't because their freedom of speech is now greatly limited, we think that is in itself a massive harm. Now some basic weighing on this. Let's say, most generous reading of OG's case, there's a religious right here that has to be weighed off. There's a trade-off here, unclear where it would matter most, again, if they were right, which they're not on religion. But for all the other protections, literally just the fact that I don't like Latinos or whatever it might be, I am now allowed to discriminate, full stop. We think there is no trade-off on that one. That's the most clear and obvious harm. And no, they can't just move. Moving is hard, even within a state. All of these reasons mean you are trapped, not able to express yourself for all those reasons. Oh well.
Two main points in my case. One, why regardless of the reason for passing this court, it is a violation of your right to your own private property with precedents on why this is true. Second, the case I like more, is about the fact why this is going to bring major backlash to minorities and actually hurt them so much in the long run in constitutional government, etc., etc. Now, before that, I have a really quick rebuttal to Ayal, which has to go with the part of it that guy did miss, and that has to do with the fact that it's a market. As in, yes, there's these rural areas and some other cities, but even if the city was super Republican and all that other shit, at at the end of the day, you're having millions of people in one space. Even a small town is within an hour drive of this place. You're saying there are no alternatives? No, there are slightly difficult alternatives that exist, as in there is going to be a market for servicing gay people. There's going to be a market where all these people are constantly discriminated against. It is a huge market because there are more and more people part of the LGBT community every single day. It is no longer that small of a minority happening. It is worth it for the business, so anyone who has even moderate conservative views will want to open this store because it's worth it for them. Moving on to my case because Yuval's going to kill me. Now, private property. I'm going to explain that, this is all based on like religion and all the other things. We're saying it does not matter what the cause of the discrimination is. We're talking about the fact that it belongs to you. Now, this is my business. We're talking about very private businesses, very small businesses, not huge corporations right now. Bakery, tattoo artists, we had the exact same examples as OG. Now, what this actually means is that this is a business I work really hard on. I spend a lot of my effort saving up my money, doing all this effort. Please stop, guys. I have a lot of my effort doing all this thing. To make this business, I had to take risks. I had to spend hours and hours and hours of my time, weeks with no sleep, all these things to create the property that is mine. It is unique to me. It is my baby. It is truly something I put my heart and soul into for hours and 12 hours a day. Plus, this is not a small style job as they try to claim where it's something you do every day. This is my passion. This is my project. This is my life. Now, why do we know that the government does not have legitimacy for it to use this property for utilitarian purposes, as OO wants to claim? Because we don't allow it. As you lost in the POI, if I have 3 vacant houses in a city, the government's not going to give them to poor homeless people while I'm not there, making sure that everything is squeaky clean and nothing was actually harmed, because it is mine, it belongs to me. It does not matter where it was. Thank you for the analysis, guy. Now, another additional thing, if it was only utilitarian, we'd put warrants in every single person's house. We bug every single person's house because then we know exactly what's happening. The primary safety, keep everyone, but no, it's unconstitutional. This place belongs to them without severe, extreme cause. It is showing a danger to someone else's life we're not allowed to. When does the government, interfere? The government interferes when you have basic rights that you cannot get elsewhere. For example, life safety, where they provide police officers. They prevent you from shooting people in the street. They don't allow you to aggressively attack other people. Education, every single person getting a basic education that they would not be able to get elsewhere. There's no other thing. Food stamps for those who literally have an undersalary that proves they cannot afford to eat that month. Why is this so clearly not under the category of when the government interferes? Because there are alternatives. Yes, Guy did give the example for alternatives, but it's not hard analysis. Everyone, none of us can be aware that there are millions of alternatives to what you can do to get another cake, to get another tattoo artist. There's not a limited amount of bakeries and tattoo parlors in this place. Guys, stop taking this personally. I love you to bits. Now, going into my second case, which is the backlash case, it goes like this. Okay, now, this is going to take a little bit more nuance, and we'll slow down a tiny bit. How does the right work? It is very easy to describe the entire right population as evil monsters. Anyone who voted for Trump is a racist motherfucker who's an asshole. I'm sorry, that's not true. Most of my family voted for Trump, and they're not racist motherfucking assholes. Why did they do this? They did this because of the black and white mentality we currently have in the U.S. Okay, we have the extreme right that is pushing for, the liberals are trying to destroy our lives, they're trying to cut off our children's genitalia. That is currently a tagline going down. Okay, they're trying to force our kids to turn to the opposite sex, they're trying to do all these things, they're evil, our kids are going to go to school and be absolutely corrupted, we're having no rights left. We're all going to be swallowed by the progressive thing. Now, a lot of these people don't think that African Americans are horrible monsters. They don't think gay people shouldn't get married. What they do think is they don't want their kid to constantly have to feel pressured to be gay and fight who they are as an actual straight person. You know, intuition pump, 50% of America voted for Trump, and I'm sorry, 50% of America are not racist motherfuckers. The majority of them will intervene if they see an issue of someone actually harassing an African American. Most people, when you see the things with the cops and George Floyd, are standing around aghast, trying to take pictures, trying to stop them. This is the majority population. The reason why they are still voting right, and the reason they are doing this is because of the absolute fear that the right is feeding into them, and this case is actually a principal point that fights the fear, and the Supreme Court giving the decision has shown the right, all these moderate people on a deep level, that they are not alone, that they are not silent, that they are not heard. As in, the Supreme Court didn't say it's completely okay to not allow any African American into your store and go back 60 years, as Ayal wants to claim. What they said is that if 2 African American males want to get married, and I personally, as a progressive, don't want to support this, don't want to see my kid see me making a gay cake when I believe that they'll go to hell for making the cake, you could not bang on the table, all these different things, this is the situation where I will actually be scared. When I see policies like this, I'm choosing between what I consider the mental health safety of my kid over these rights that they're not even pushing for the rights that actually exist. It is making all the left's pushings and ideas of there's mass racism, cops are killing black people, to fall into the same category of the gays are super discriminated against, we don't give their cake. Without having the nuance of on the difference between the forms of discrimination, you are creating a very black and white society for all these moderate people to look at. Yes, Ayal.
Rights are a question of extent. The harm to me when I lose my house is fundamentally different in scale than the harm when I do my chosen job and get paid for it, but I'm forced to do it for a black person.
As I already explained, we are talking about small businesses, and there is no discrimination where I'm not allowed to do it for a black person because that's not fucking expressive. If they said black people are superior to white people, I am allowed to choose to not write that on my cake. Sure, because I don't believe in superiority of any race, and that goes against my initial beliefs. You are trying to make us a blanket, we hate all black people now, which I get why it's kind of my MO in debate. Still not going to work here, Ayal. There is a complete and utter lack of nuance in the actual situations we're talking about. We are not talking about telling someone that their kid cannot join our school because they're gay. We are not talking about kicking people out of a store because they couldn't get holding hands. We are talking about not forcing an artist who spent their entire life building their passion project, building their entire thing, to choose between letting their baby go or fighting against all their morals and principles and going to sleep every night feeling in agony because they could not choose what was important to them. Now, what is actually happening without this law happening? All the moderates are much less easily fooled. So yes, you are still going to have the extreme right-wing people that will still vote for Trump because they're racist motherfuckers, but you have all the other people, like my poor confused parents who genuinely think that the US government is trying to cut off kids' genitalia and that you have no absolute no rights or any part of the Constitution that used to exist no longer exists, that is no longer protecting us, that we can't trust our Supreme Court, that we can't do this. It gives them so much more incentive to try to vote as right as possible to counter these measures. It makes them feel completely unsafe and then feeling that they have to turn to violence, to their own gun rights, to all these other alternatives because they don't have anyone backing them up and they have to go alt-right, as opposed to actually being good, nice people, which exist.
Two parts to the speech. One, some rebuttal, and also acts as a point to explain why we have a positive right in this case, it is a legitimate thing to do. Secondly, why we significantly hurt minorities' political outcomes and how that was the debate. I will do the first one quite quickly, otherwise Naomi will kill it. So we hear a lot of stuff about how this is a violation of my right to property. This is wrong on two accounts. One, because property is not just belongs to the individual. Property is enabled by society, and thus it is a social construct. Why? One, society creates the infrastructure that allows them to actually generate property. Secondly, society generates the safety that allows them to generate property. Thirdly, society gives them the social services that allow them to have property in the first place. It also creates the people who actually buy my things off me. A, minorities contributed to the society and thus directly contributed to my ability to create this personal property in the first place. Saying it is only mine is kind of strange. Secondly, society also benefits from the distribution of these ideals and ideas, and thus it is very important to protect society's ability to create them. Secondly, the reason we have property is to maximize the fulfillment of individuals, and we think that the kinds of harms we're talking about are just far outweigh the expression that is being harmed, as I'm going to talk about in my point. Secondly, on this backlash point, I want to point out two major problems. One, we're repealing, we're not passing, and thus the backlash is a really strange thing to talk about, given that nothing is changing in that sense of the world. Secondly, I think that they never show me the tipping point. Why will people stop believing that the Democrats are trying to cut off children's genitalia? At worst, all they're going to do is say, actually, now we've actually succeeded on the right, and we can prevent people from trying to cut off genitalia. This just sounds like it strengthens the backlash, as I'm going to be using that in a moment. Since they don't do that, I'm spraying the CO out of the debate. It took me a minute and a half. Now let's get into my points. What are the impacts I'm going to be proving? One, I'm going to prove in a longer term, deeper harm than anything that has come before in the debate by explaining why we're going to lose significant amount of capital and passing of voting rights issues. These are going to be far more important than an individual's specific expression of having to write on a cake. Secondly, it's going to be more important changes, right? We're going to be talking about how people remain trapped in unfair systems that don't allow them self-fulfillment, as opposed to on our side of the house. Okay, how does this significantly hurt minorities' political outcomes? One, this empowers conservative and racist movements in two ways. A, it motivates conservatives to vote to a very large extent. How does it do that? A, they have had a big practical success, and it's usually pointed to but both for themselves and by their politicians who can hold on to this and say, look, we will pass the things you want us to do. Voting for us isn't in vain. Voting for us will achieve significant changes that A, you see on a day-to-day basis. B, you hear about all of the time because these are exactly the kinds of things where there are going to be many cases where you actually get to manifest this right. So this isn't something that's high up in the air, but this is something you feel on a, literally a daily basis. Let's say weekly, monthly basis. Secondly, it's a big narrative success. Look, this was a law that was incredibly important to the left, and we managed to destroy it. We managed to beat them at their own game and changed what they had gotten. Notice that this is exactly the kind of thing that is really important to motivating people to vote, because oftentimes you need to show you can actually change or prevent the other side from doing what they have wanted to do. You can actually succeed against them, and that this is specifically something that we've done. Thirdly, this is exactly the kind of thing that gets covered by news media. This is a federal level decision, which means it's much more, you hear about a lot more than something that's passed at a local level. So there's a massive amount of media attention, loads of articles. This is something that almost everyone is actually going to hear about. And secondly, this is something where there is a huge amount of interest due to the nature of it being something that you encounter on a frequent basis. Secondly, this actually legitimizes these narratives to a very large extent. We think the Supreme Court is one of the most respected parts of the American democracy. It is something where the people within it are incredibly learned, they're incredibly intelligent, they're incredibly articulate, and they write out their decisions and explain how they actually reached them and what their considerations for them were. And we think that when people both read this, but also see that such venerated and amazing individuals think these kinds of things, or think that this is the kind of right that is incredibly important to have, this greatly strengthens the conservative movement both within it by giving it a lot of legitimacy, which otherwise mostly people just think that kind of crazy, but secondly also convinces people through these kinds of writings that are very, very convincing, especially independents. What does this do? A, we think that a lot more conservatives are likely to go out and vote on our side of the house in the midterms, in the next elections, both for president, midterms, Congress, all of those kinds of things, which is exactly where conservatives can then block the Democrats from being able to pass laws within the House, be able to put a president in there who can just not, what's what I'm looking for, when he doesn't sign laws into passing, and so they don't actually occur, and generally paralyze any democratic attempt to pass changes in the future. Secondly, it oftentimes convinces more people to join many racist ways of thinking that they otherwise would. Secondly, and this obviously translates into more racist laws. We're also looking like more political rallies that make people feel unsafe because they feel more legitimated in actually doing them, and like more people are going to join them. This looks like more funding for extremist political views, and so they get more of a platform and they become more prevalent and people see them more often. And we think that all of these things make people both feel safer, but less safe, but also actually change the outcomes of elections. Secondly, this weakens liberal movements. How does it do that? One, it mostly creates a feeling of hopelessness. It means that A, our votes don't matter, because even when we win elections, we still can't change anything. We currently have a Democratic president. We had the Senate, and yet still these laws are being passed, and we are left helpless, and we are being seriously harmed by this. Secondly, it also means that we can't actually change the system in any meaningful way. Anything that does get passed will just get repealed. I think this is uniquely important because minorities often find it very hard to vote, and so they need to be significantly convinced in order to bother to take that time off work, the money that they're losing, the fact they have to stand in line and often don't have water, and these kinds of things mean that they just don't bother. Secondly, I also think the minorities really need to push their agenda within the Democratic Party. And when they try to get overturned, they don't bother doing that, and so the majority party don't represent them as well. Yes?
Roe versus Wade and the rest of the current Supreme Court decisions, the matter says in your case. We did it on.
Thank you. I'm going to answer this now. Great. What does this mean on our side of the house? It means much less voter turnout on our side, which means a lot less Democrats are going to vote. Secondly, which means it's much harder to win elections. This also looks like less people actually going out and protesting, which means the general feeling of political will is significantly changed, and a lot less funding of these political movements. And this means that we have a lot less majority prioritization of these important issues as well. Notice. Great. Now, how is this actually different? What is the difference of this law versus Roe v. Wade? I told you I would get to it. One, I think that this war has a lot more disagreement. Roe versus Wade is generally unpopular with everyone. This specific issue does not. Yes, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Anyway, this specific issue is generally very, very, very tight, and a lot of people have significant disagreements about it, and thus actually being able to pass it makes a significant difference to a lot more of the conservative movement. Roe versus Wade mattered to extreme conservative religious people. That was it. Nobody else gave a shit. That is not true of discrimination laws. Secondly, it's a very important law from a narrative perspective, and so even if Roe versus Wade happened, more of those creates another more and more delta, because within political activism, you need constant political victories to mobilize your base and make the other side feel bad. One victory isn't enough to do that. What have I shown? I've shown why it'd be fun. Thank you so much.
Two questions in this debate. Is it legitimate to force people to sell services to people that they don't want to sell to? Secondly, in which side is it utilitarian harm more people? Does it harm religious side more? Does it harm less? Minorities more, etc.? Which is utilitarian more harm? I want to weigh the first clash on legitimacy. I think it's more important, and I think we win it. But before that, I want to give extraneous points to rebuttal to the opposition. I was very disappointed in the way I heard your case, to be honest, because the main bottom line is more people vote conservatively. I have no idea why that is a bad thing that people vote conservative. I think conservative ideologies are often good ideologies, and we have no ability to decide which ideology is best. Like, for instance, I think maybe I would go to the most extreme case. I think maybe even not to recognize trans people as the opposite gender, maybe actually deteriorates their mental health, which is a lot of the claims that people make in the right. I think that conservatives are not outright racist when they don't want immigration. I think that's a legitimate policy, etc., that we are fine supporting. I think that no one preference can be considered objective truth over another, and they never prove why progressivism is the inherent objective truth and conservatism is not. Whenever somebody who is conservative gets, the rights taken against from them, the fact it hurts them just as much as it hurts a progressive person who doesn't get a vote. We think that democracy is a legitimate tool, and people who want to vote conservative in a democracy is a legitimate tool for them. We have no idea why this is a winning case for them. Let's talk about what metric should this debate be decided on. Because top half mostly talk about utility. Mostly, not all. I'll flag where they don't. But like open government tells about how much this hurts religious people when we force them to do that in the illegitimate. Opening opposition tells about how much this hurts minorities, etc. All of them are, and then basically to win this clash, you have to consider which one is hurt more at the end of the day as judges. We don't think that the metric on which sides people are hurt more is the metric by which you should decide this debate. Why? Because that's not what governments do in the status quo, and that's not what they should do. Governments operate based on rights. And I want to give you a few examples here. If we reduce the threshold for you to get a warrant to search somebody, we would probably be able to catch a lot more criminals, therefore help society. However, even though it's utilitarian good, we don't allow them to do it because people have a right to privacy. We would rather free 100 rapists than send one innocent man to jail, even though that would probably prevent a lot of rape and help utility on their side of the house. We think that people have a right to be innocent until proven guilty, and that trumps utility. We think that homeless people cannot steal from the rich, even though utilitarianly it's probably going to work for it's going to be beneficial, etc. Therefore, so we don't think that the debate as a whole should be decided on the basis of utility. So what should it be decided on? Rights. And we analyzed in a great extent why businesses is your private property and you have a right to control the way you see fit. And we also analyzed the extent of how you control it. If I have a house, even if it doesn't hurt me that a homeless person is going to use it when I'm not there, I'm still allowed to ban that homeless person from staying in my house. When Ayal tells you in the POI that rights are all about extents, he's lying to you. You're not allowed to hurt the right of a rich person to his house, even though it hurts him to a very little extent, and it helps the homeless person to a very large extent. What are the responses we got from closing opposition team? They told us that actually property in itself is also owned by the state because it is enabled by society. It's part of the social construct, and they use the infrastructure, etc. Several responses to it. First of all, for this thing we do get from society, like infrastructure, businesses pay taxes for it, and I think that's the thing that they pay in order to pay for the infrastructure and stuff that they get. But secondly, I think it's bullshit to say that businesses are part of the social construct. Businesses existed a lot before countries existed, a lot before states existed, and a lot before anything existed. People always used to trade stuff under their own free will. And we think that the fact that somebody is buying from you, decides to buy from you, is not a legitimation to say that you have no property right and you can take it whatever you want. But secondly, it does, property is only instrumental to help utility. And I think Rina already answered it from her own case when she said, no, it's not. There are many cases where utility is winning, but we still choose property. So it's just a lie coming from closing opposition. So what is the limit of the right of property, and when do we not stop it? We think that the limit is when somebody has a greater right being harmed. Like probably the right to life, which is why we support, or the right to basic education, which is why we in general support taxes. But we think here particularly there is no right that is being harmed that is more significant than private property. And here I want to give you the non-utilitarian way that opening opposition say. They say people have a right to those services. These are basic services and we all supply to them. And here the problem, bullshit. Which services are we talking about? Tattoos, wedding cakes. These are by nowhere means basic rights. People can live without them, and people can live with the hassle of going to a bit farther city to get them. I don't think it by any means a basic right, whereas the private property is much more of a basic right. Before I continue, please.
The Supreme Court ruled that discriminatory laws in non-expressive businesses are still legitimate because they waive the right of property under the harms of discrimination. You must support.
I don't care why the Supreme Court made the decision that he made. I just think it's a good decision. You can say that the Supreme Court did it for any reason possible, it just doesn't matter. We think that it allows people to enact the right of private property and to control their private property and to not give to people that they don't want. I think this is a bottom good. So I think it's in this debate. And I think the only part of the OG case that's, principle is saying the right of free speech, which they never actually analyze. Compare what they say, guys say in one line or in minute 6:30 to the entire analysis that Rina gave to you about private property. I think this is much further. I think we already won this debate. But let's then talk about utility. Because I think that Rina already said it, but opening opposition overly exaggerate the point of, people are literally not going to have access to these services. And even provided us, because America is not such a loose country. And even if they want to tie to the minority of people that have no other services, this is such a minute amount of people that their utility is probably not that important at the end of the day. But I think Rina also gives you a practical case here about how people generally, even conservatives, are not racist as a whole. They are not such anti-minority. They usually support the live and let live mentality. They just want to be able to live their own life and they won't care. I think that the backlash it generates, in particular, when we force them to do stuff against the will, it causes them to be more racist against minority. It causes them to be more hating towards them because they feel that it's being pushed down their throat, that they're being coercive. I think Rina is maybe not the only American person here, but the most American person here. Actually understand what's going on within the American society, especially she's the one that actually, her family voted for the other side. So I think even on that note, we're able to decrease the amount of racism once we don't force feed into conservatives that we're pushing down liberal ideologies down the throat. And I think it causes them to be more reasonable people. It allows them to live together even when otherwise they wouldn't have been. For all of these reasons, closing government.
2, 1. There are two clashes within this debate. The first are the consequences of this decision. The second is whether this was a legitimate decision. Note that either side can win on either clash. What you need to do is weigh which is more important. Too bad OG didn't do this, but I am going to. I'm going to explain why the consequences are more important and the legitimacy is less. And therefore, by winning on the consequences, we win the debate as a whole. But first, I want to respond to some things that we heard from CG. On this idea of, we're not going to be bolstering conservatism, that conservatism is good, so what's wrong with bolstering conservatism? We're not necessarily bolstering conservatives, we're bolstering people who believe discrimination is okay, and when they're allowed to discriminate, that bolsters them and encourages them. We're specifically bolstering within the conservative political map those individuals that believe in values that we do think are normatively a bad thing, harms to others, things that we have made illegal and do not support because we don't want them to exist within our society. That means it's not necessarily that that does of course strengthen that side of the political map, more importantly it drags that side of the political map to more harmful policy and to worse things that will be done to individuals and more harms to individuals through legislation, through changes within the courts, and through policy that is furthered. By the way, this distinction is another reason why Roe v. Wade is a different example here, and it isn't, there were things that bolstered the right, so it's all the same thing. Because, maybe abortion is murder, maybe I'm fine with bolstering people who believe with that and want to fight against abortion occurring, but no, we don't think discrimination is okay, and we don't want to bolster that side of the political map. Furthermore, we think that this differs in another way. We think that at the end of the day, Roe v. Wade affects people, that this decision on discrimination affects people directly a lot more, and a lot more individuals. There are far more business owners than there are people that interact directly with abortion and experience it and have that be part of their day-to-day lives. There are far more people who are afraid of being forced to express some sort of idea they don't believe in, or simply believe in discrimination and get upset about discriminatory ideas. So we think that this just affects a lot more people, and people that we don't want to affect as much. We think that and therefore this is far worse. Also, we think that at the end of the day, a lot of the policies that are pushed by specifically the right within the US are frequently dis-Utah for minorities, are harmful to them, reduce the extent to which wealth is redistributed and people's ability to raise themselves is increased. But note, we're not dependent on those being bad things, but we do think that they also generally tend to be bad because they prevent the state from fulfilling its role of taking care of the individuals within it and allowing them a safe, healthy, happy life. They oppose things like healthcare for all and actually saving people's lives, things that I think the entire world has agreed are basic goods that ought to be occurring. Let's get into the clashes. Why do we think that the consequences of this decision are the most important thing? First off, we think they're just the priority of most individuals. Most individuals, when they look at a Supreme Court decision, don't say, oh no, but it's so unjust and so it's terrible. They'll say, shit, this is going to lead to this and that behavior. This is going to lead to this and that policy change. This is going to lead to this and that changes to my life. And that is the thing that actually they care about. Second, we think that that is the way the Supreme Court is actually treated by politicians. They're not appointing people so that they'll make more just decisions. They're appointing people so they'll make decisions that will lead to the political outcomes that they are interested in. Third, we think that justice to begin with is just an idea with no clear definition, and therefore the opinion of what is justice differs so vastly from one person to another that to try to claim that this is universally justice is not applicable in the vast majority of cases. We think that to claim that this is universally harmful and something negative that will be experienced by a lot of people is a lot more likely to be a generally accepted value. Lastly, note that even the justifications we receive for the legitimacy case and for whether this decision were right are almost exclusively based on the relative consequences and harms to each side on this decision and whether utility is better or worse for each of those sides. Everyone has been weighing off, they don't get harmed that much, they get harmed a lot. Their idea of justice is also still just utility. Why do we think that we do the most on these consequences? Weighing off against OO first. On this idea of OO, they have a pain of seeing this. I think that our harm is a lot more additive. As the positions pointed out about the fear and the reminders, the individuals are already aware and afraid for the most part, and as DLO says, they breed less fear-mongering. They saw Roe v. Wade, so this idea of bad things are happening in a general manner, and this I should be afraid still exists. And we think that once you are afraid, there's not a lot of increase that you can do within that realm because you're still living within that idea. But we think that when our impact creates even individuals who are already on the conservative side, we give them a stronger opinion and more motivation. So they might not have changed their mind, they might have still the same opinion, we don't need some sort of tipping point, but they're taking more action, they're donating more money to that cause, there is more voter turnout, they are showing up for protests, they are making more of an effort, and these things are an enormous difference. Next, on access to goods, we just think that there is far more likely to be some sort of alternative for access to goods for people, but policy changes in legislation are unavoidable by individuals, and so they have no alternative and no way of avoiding these negative consequences. Lastly, on both impacts, we just think that there's a far smaller extent than changes in policy, other changes in policy of the monetary value of support for individuals, helping them with suicide, helping women advance more in the workplace and these sorts of policies, or healthcare for all that don't occur when we bolster this side of the political spectrum, and therefore we want to avoid, and they're far less important to individuals. Most people don't prioritize having a cake over having healthcare. Yes, opening.
Don't strawman our case. It's not about the religious rights, but rather about any part of someone's identity that is important enough for him to not want to express something that's opposing it, which we provide a principle.
Okay, but I deprioritize identity against safety of your life and access to goods and to income. Why do we think that also our consequences are more important than OG? Note the OG's consequences of, oh, there are more left-wing businesses. If this were people's preference, they would go buy from those businesses and bolster them. If it's not enough of a preference for them to make the sacrifices to go purchase from them, why force them to suffer more so now that sacrifice is worthwhile? That sounds like a terrible policy idea. And again, CG, I don't think that inaction leads to backlash. Lastly, on legitimacy and some responses on that. Note that harm to property is already normalized. I'm glad CG bring up taxation, because taxation is harm to property for far less big issues such as funding a public theatre, and we think that's perfectly legitimate. Property is not some holy value, it is not the value that is being protected in this legislation. And on OG, I think that most of the harms that they claim to individuals' identity are relevant to regular discrimination without expressiveness. The idea of, oh, I took part in this, I supported it. People know that I serve these individuals and I am associated with these things. And we don't think that those are relevant. And we think insofar as reputation, they're relevant to all business owners, and you have a justification point. Please oppose.